Some wounds never truly fade. They just stop bleeding. Claire thought time would heal them, that silence could make them vanish. But when the truth finally came, it didn't erase the past. It rewrote it. This is the story of two hearts that almost let go, and the night they found their way back. They had been married for 14 years. And on that Tuesday evening, if you had stepped into their apartment, you wouldn't have believed it. No shouting. No fighting. Just silence. The kind of silence that swallows sound whole. The kind you could drown in. Michael unlocked the door, the soft click of the deadbolt sounding far too loud in the stillness. He stepped inside, loosened his tie, and set his briefcase down on the hallway table. The keys in his hand slipped from his fingers with a muted clink against the wood, an echo that seemed to stretch all the way to the kitchen. Claire stood there, her back to him, a stemless glass of red wine resting lightly in her hand. The dim overhead light caught the curve of her shoulder, the slow lift of her arm as she took a sip. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. They had perfected the art of avoiding each other. 2 years ago, they would have met right here in the entryway. A kiss, a laugh, the warmth of fingertips brushing as they passed. A nod. Maybe a flat, hey, if either of them felt generous. Neither of them could pinpoint the exact day when home stopped feeling like home. It didn't leave a mark, that moment. No shattering argument, no dramatic goodbye. Just a slow fading, like the last embers of a fire going cold. And neither of them knew, not yet, that the next 3 weeks would change everything. All because of a strange therapy session and a lie they were never supposed to find out. Michael was 45, a senior architect at one of the city's most respected firms. Precision was his language. He could glance at a blueprint and spot a flaw no one else would see. To him, beauty was in clean lines and perfect proportions, even if that meant life itself often felt like another project to manage. Deadlines didn't just guide his work, they ruled his days. Claire, 42, was the kind of woman you'd notice twice. A marketing director for a luxury fashion brand, she carried herself like every boardroom was a runway. Her elegance was calculated but never cold. She knew how to make a campaign sing, how to turn desire into sales. But beneath the gloss, she was tired. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. They had no children. Not for lack of wanting or trying. 4 years, IVF cycles had been their private war, each attempt filled with hope, each ending with a quiet kind of devastation. They never found the right words for that grief. Instead, they folded it neatly and tucked it into the unspoken corners of their marriage. The space between them had once been full of plans and laughter. Now, it held mostly silence. Friday night, Claire tried one more time. She'd made the reservation at Bella Rosa, the little Italian place where they'd celebrated their 3rd anniversary, back when love felt easy and conversations didn't need rescuing. She even wore the red silk blouse Michael once said made her look like trouble. Tonight, she needed trouble to be worth noticing. The soft hum of violins floated through the restaurant as they sat down. Candlelight flickered between them, casting shadows that felt too long for such a small table. "Remember the time you dropped an entire plate of pasta here?" Claire asked, forcing a smile, hoping to stir something warm. Michael's lips curved faintly. A polite laugh. Then his phone buzzed. It started with a glance at the screen, then a swipe, and within minutes, his gaze was lost to the blue glow of work emails. "Michael, can you put your phone down for just one dinner? This is important, Claire. It's about the Henderson project." She let the silence answer for her, swallowing the lump in her throat. "But the project." "Always the project." Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood. She didn't wait for the check, didn't wait for dessert. Outside, rain fell in sharp, cold needles, plastering her hair to her cheeks. In the cab ride home, City lights blurred into streaks against the wet glass. She pressed her forehead to the window and whispered, almost too softly to hear, "We can't keep doing this." The weekend sunlight spilled lazily into Claire's kitchen, pooling on the marble counter where 2 untouched cups of coffee sat cooling. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and something burnt. Evelyn had insisted on making toast, but conversation had eclipsed breakfast. Claire leaned against the counter, arms folded, her gaze fixed on a smear of coffee she hadn't bothered to wipe. Evelyn, perched on a stool, didn't interrupt. She just listened. That was her way, letting silence stretch until it became an invitation. When Claire finally stopped talking, Evelyn tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing with a kind of cautious curiosity. "Claire, have you heard of Mind's Eye?" The question landed like a pebble dropped into still water. Claire blinked. "No. Should I have?" Evelyn set her cup down, both hands wrapping around it as though she needed the warmth to steady her words. "It's not exactly mainstream," she began. "A 3-week neuropsych program. For couples who are standing on the cliff's edge." Claire raised an eyebrow. "You mean divorce?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Worse sometimes. The last step, their signature procedure, is called memory recalibration." The name alone made the air feel heavier. Claire's lips parted slightly. "Memory recalibration?" "The idea," Evelyn continued, her voice lowering, "is to erase the emotional weight from the worst memories you've got of each other. Not the memories themselves, just the sting. The resentment. The kind of moments you replay at night like a bad movie." Claire's brows knitted. "You're saying they just take the pain away?" "They make you sign thick, detailed consent forms," Evelyn said. "And before the last session, they give you one warning, one that's honestly unsettling." Claire waited. Evelyn took a sip of coffee that had long since gone cold. "They tell you, if this fails, it may mean you have a hateful disposition that requires higher-level therapy." Claire gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Erase memories?" "Evelyn, that sounds insane." "Maybe," Evelyn said with a shrug. "But I've heard of couples walking in ready to sign divorce papers, and walking out looking like they just got back from their honeymoon." Claire stared at her friend for a long moment, her coffee forgotten. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted, something between skepticism and the tiniest flicker of dangerous hope. Later that night, Claire sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open, her face lit by the bluish glow of the screen. Michael leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "It sounds like a gimmick," Michael said. "So does couples therapy. And yet here we are, not even trying that anymore." Her voice didn't rise, but there was a quiet finality to it, like she'd already decided. Michael stayed silent for a beat, eyes narrowing slightly. "Fine. Let's do it. What's the worst that could happen?" Claire's lips curved, not quite a smile, but close enough. She tapped book session, the mouse click echoing in the room. Somewhere in the pit of his stomach, Michael felt a faint, unfamiliar unease. He couldn't name it, but it clung to him even as she closed the laptop and turned off the light. They booked the session, neither knowing it would change everything they thought they knew about love and each other. Session 1. The room smells faintly of lavender, but the scent does little to soften the tension sitting between them. Soft, ambient music hums in the background, too gentle for the sharp edges of what's about to surface. They sit across from each other, hands clasped in their laps, eyes restless. The exercises are simple on paper, guided visualizations, emotion mapping, memory walks, through old arguments, this time with controlled breathing. But controlled breathing can't tame the sting of truth. Michael's voice wavers as he admits he's felt invisible in his own home. Claire's jaw tightens before she confesses she's been holding back ever since their last failed IVF attempt. The air grows heavier. Lavender can't mask the scent of old wounds being reopened. Words that had once been swallowed are finally spoken, but instead of mending, they split the seams wider. They leave the room not lighter, but stiffer, like two strangers who've just learned too much. Session 2. They're told to describe each other in 10 adjectives. Half of them don't match. The therapist doesn't flinch, just scribbles it down, as if mismatched perceptions were just another Tuesday. Sessions now end with 2 minutes of silence. It feels awkward at first, like being stuck in an elevator with someone you once loved but now don't know how to speak to. But somehow, the quiet starts to sand down the edges of their tension. Just a little. Not nearly enough to save a marriage already limping toward the ruins. Later that week, Michael asked if she'd eat her favorite meal, the one he was about to cook. His car was in for a minor repair, so she drove him to work. Nothing dramatic. Just small, ordinary moments that didn't feel like they could change anything. It was week 3, the final session. The room is quiet in a way that feels intentional. White walls, warm lighting, the air faintly scented with something floral but hard to name. Dr. Lenz greets them with the kind of composure that makes you want to whisper, as if raising your voice might break something delicate. Dr. Lenz said, "When this process is complete, you will still remember the events, but without the emotional sting. Like reading a chapter from a book that no longer belongs to you." They sit side by side, their knees not quite touching. The consent forms are thick, the paper dense, the black ink of their signatures stark against the page. The pens feel heavier than they should, like they're signing something far more permanent than they've been told. Headphones. Eyes closed. Ocean waves roll in and out. Low chimes drift like distant bells. There are whispers too, fragments of sentences they can't quite catch, words curling just out of reach. Time becomes slippery, seconds pooling into minutes, minutes into something unmeasurable. Then a tap on the shoulder. The session is over. Dr. Lenz's smile is small but certain. Now, a daily ritual. 2 minutes. Stand together, no distractions, and look at each other. This reinforces the reset. Her tone shifts just slightly, enough for the next words to settle in their bones. "Dr. Lenz, if this doesn't work, perhaps the problem is deeper than the memories." Neither of them says it, but both are thinking the same thing. And what if it is? On the first morning, their hug is stiff, like two strangers practicing a dance they've never learned. Claire's arms loop around Michael's shoulders, but her body stays guarded. Michael's hands rest politely on her back, careful not to linger. They part quickly, each pretending not to notice the awkward air that follows. Day 3. When she steps into his arms, Michael catches a faint, familiar note in the air. Her perfume, the same one she wore the night they first met. His fingers hesitate on her back for half a second longer than they should. She doesn't notice, or pretends not to. Day 5. Claire's hand brushes against his during the hug. She freezes for a beat, then lets it stay there a moment longer than necessary. She remembers how his hands used to feel, strong but careful, like they knew exactly where to be. Her pulse betrays her before she pulls away. Claire's cheek brushed against his shoulder as they held each other, the faint scent of his soap mixing with the lingering notes of her perfume. She was about to pull away, keeping it safe, keeping it polite, when Michael muttered something under his breath. She froze. It was the punchline to an old, ridiculous inside joke from years ago, one so random it had no business living rent-free in either of their heads. Her lips twitched before she could stop them. Then his chest shook with quiet laughter. Hers followed. The hug, which should have ended, lingered. It no longer felt like part of the exercise. His hand moved slowly, absent-mindedly, up her back in a way that made her remember Sunday mornings, lazy conversations, and the warmth of not having to pretend. For a moment, The years between them vanished. Neither of them talks about it, but the air feels different. The hug is slower now. Michael's hand lingers on her waist. Her cheek rests against his chest longer than the bare minimum. They are both acting, but it's starting to feel less like a performance. Dayton. This time, it isn't a quick step in and out. He pulls her close and stays there. His breath brushes her ear as he whispers, "I missed this." She doesn't pull away. Instead, she lets her hands slide up his back, fingertips grazing familiar territory. And in that quiet space, the pretending cracks, letting something real slip through. The door clicked open at 10:47 p.m., a time Claire had stopped expecting him long ago. Michael stepped in, still in his suit, his tie loosened just enough to suggest the day had been long, or that he had chosen not to rush home. His phone was pressed firmly to his ear, his voice low but quick, his other hand already waving her off before she could open her mouth. She froze in the hallway, holding the mug of tea she'd made for him out of habit, the steam curling like a question she was too afraid to ask. "No, don't say that, you know it's not true." Michael's voice dropped into a softer register, the kind he used when he wanted to be trusted. Claire's eyes narrowed, not at his words, but at the sound that floated back in response. A woman. Not a laugh exactly, not a whisper, just a voice, rich and threaded with familiarity, as though it had passed through this line before. Michael didn't see her watching as he walked straight past, down the hall, and closed himself in his study. The tea cooled in her hands. The silence between them that night didn't break, not for the evening ritual they'd clung to, not for a goodnight kiss, not even for the pretense of warmth. Claire lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, while the smell of bergamot and paper from their bedroom drifted in faintly through the crack in the door. Somewhere between the steady tick of the clock and the rustle of sheets she wasn't lying in, she wondered if she had just heard the sound of her marriage slipping. 2 days later, the sky over the city was a pale, powdery blue, streaked with faint gold. The air was still, too still, like the kind that comes before a storm. Claire sat curled up on the balcony, knees drawn to her chest, a blanket draped over her shoulders even though it wasn't cold. Her gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the rooftops, at nothing in particular. The mug beside her had long gone cold. She heard the door unlock earlier than usual. Footsteps. No dragging weariness in them. Today they were steady, deliberate. Michael stepped into the living room, jacket still in hand, scanning the space until his eyes caught hers through the open balcony door. He came out slowly, almost cautious, like she was a deer that might bolt. "About the call," he began, voice low, carrying that measured calm he used when walking into difficult meetings. "It was my old colleague, Samantha. She offered me a partnership. In Boston. I didn't know how to tell you." Claire didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. The wind teased a strand of hair across her face. "I thought," she exhaled, shaking her head slightly, "maybe it was someone else." Something flickered across Michael's face, hurt, maybe, or the shadow of it. He set his jacket down and crouched in front of her. "Claire, I've been here. I've been trying." His voice carried that rare softness he didn't give to the world outside. Silence swelled between them, heavy but not hostile. It was the kind of quiet where both were measuring how much they'd been holding back. He sank onto the chair beside her, close enough for their knees to almost touch. And then the words started, halting at first, then pouring. They talked for hours about Boston, about her fears, about how long it had been since they felt like they were on the same side of the same fight. The conversation wasn't neat. It wandered into regrets, into half-healed hurts, into laughter they didn't expect. Somewhere between the honesty and the pauses, the walls between them didn't fall all at once. They cracked, just enough for light to slip through. When Michael finally reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. 2 weeks later, The email arrived from Mind's Eye. Follow-up appointment, progress evaluation. Michael almost ignored it, thinking it was just another survey. But Claire said they should go. Let's hear what they have to say, she shrugged, slipping on her coat. The same calming lavender greeted them as they stepped into the white-walled office. Dr. Lenz was there, seated in that perfectly neutral posture that always made them feel like she could read their thoughts. Michael, Claire, she began, smiling warmly. We've been monitoring your post-session progress, and it's remarkable. Your connection appears stronger, your tension lower. Claire nodded, glancing at Michael. But then Dr. Lenz leaned forward, voice soft but deliberate. There's something you should know. Mind's Eye does not erase memories. That part is, by design, an illusion. The words hung in the air like a dropped glass that hadn't hit the floor yet. Michael blinked. I'm sorry, what? We don't take away the events, Dr. Lenz continued. We only frame them differently. The recalibration is a psychological nudge. You believe the sting is gone, so you behave as if it is. And because no one wants to be labeled the hateful one, she let the thought trail off. Claire sat frozen, heart thudding. Nothing had been erased. Not the fights. Not the hurt. It had all still been there, yet somehow they'd been different. On the drive home, the shock softened into something else. Claire turned to Michael, half smiling. So, you didn't forget? He laughed, shaking his head. Not a thing. You. She laughed too. Every word is still there. And yet, it doesn't feel the same anymore. By the time they pulled into the driveway, the disbelief had melted into a strange gratitude. Whatever magic Mind's Eye had worked, real or not, they were glad they'd taken the chance. That night, Claire picked up her phone and called Evelyn. You'll never guess what we found out today, she began. Evelyn didn't miss a beat. That they don't actually erase anything? Claire gasped. You knew. Of course I knew. I just figured you needed the push. And look at you now, laughing again. They both burst out laughing, the kind that carries relief in its echo. Thank you, Claire said quietly and meant it. That night, Michael walked in. No suit jacket, no shield of excuses, just him. Claire was waiting, sitting on the couch with the faint glow of the lamp softening the edges of her face. He stopped at the doorway, their eyes locking. No words. None were needed. He crossed the room slowly, like a man approaching something sacred. She stood. 2 minutes of simply holding on, as though they'd both been drowning for months and had finally broken the surface. The truth, raw and unpolished, had already been spoken earlier that evening. And with it came a strange, aching relief. They weren't perfect. They weren't fixed. But they were here. Together. Choosing. Michael's hands slid up her back, memorizing her shape again. She tilted her head, and their lips met, not in polite reconciliation, but in a hungry, desperate kiss that tasted of tears and gratitude. The kind that says I almost lost you. Clothes became irrelevant. Time, irrelevant. They moved with the quiet urgency of two people rediscovering a language they used to speak fluently, a language of touch, breath, and whispered names. His hands in her hair, her fingers trailing over his skin like she was writing him back into her story. The air grew thick with heat and forgiveness. Passion folded into tenderness, and tenderness into something deeper, that choice to love louder than the pain. Much later, tangled in the quiet, they lay skin to skin. Michael's heartbeat was steady under her cheek. Claire's hand rested over it, like a promise. The memory stayed. The hurt was still there, somewhere in the background. But the choice had changed everything. Tonight, they didn't just find their way back to each other. They came home. Love isn't the absence of wounds, it's the decision to tend to them together. Michael and Claire didn't find a perfect ending, they found something better, the courage to stay. Sometimes, the miracle isn't in forgetting the past, but in choosing to build a future anyway. Because in the end, love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you keep making day after day. And when you make that choice with the right person, it changes everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to VoiceThread for more.